Okay, hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I wanted to do a recap of a remote that I did about 7 months ago. This is before I had a YouTube channel. What I was doing was that I've been doing remote viewings on the Russia hacking of the elections going back about almost 2 years, right after Donald Trump got elected. I decided to do some remote viewing, and I started experimenting and documenting the remote viewings for accuracy. I want to explain briefly the technique I use when I remote view. I use a meditation technique where I get into a really deep state of meditation, and then I use something that is basically like a Kuan Yin meditation. It's a heart-centered, a heart-based meditation where you get into a very, very relaxed state, and then you open your heart, and with love and compassion, you send love and compassion without bias to others, and then from a state of love and compassion, you attempt to access information. The idea being that when you send love and compassion to people, people tend to be less defensive, you tend to be more open and less biased, and you are able to see more of what's really going on. So I want to do a recap really briefly of a remote viewing that I did early on. There's a lot of remote viewings I did that I really want to put on this channel. I want to go ahead and redo them so that people that are now tuning into this channel can know what has been happening. And the remotes are very, very specific, so people know exactly what's going on. And in terms of accuracy, I think I'm pretty accurate. So I want to talk first off about how this got started. Now, in the late 80s, we wanted to believe, or at least publicly we wanted to believe, that the Cold War had come to an end. But as far as Russia was concerned, there were certain elements within the Kremlin that continued to monitor and spy on the United States, even though publicly the policy was that the Cold War was coming to an end. I did a remote viewing on Donald Trump, and here is what I heard. I heard that Donald Trump had said that he began to be introduced to Russian business people when he was working for his father, that he first began to be introduced to Russian business through his father. So basically, former Russian expats were buying up property in New York, and Trump was following his father, Fred, excuse me, I've got a bad cough. He was following Trump Sr. around, and this was when he was first introduced to these Russian expats that had shown an interest in buying up property in New York. Some would argue, I would argue, that this is when he first became compromised. He first became compromised when he was assisting his father in his father's business, even prior to, this was very, very early on. And so that was Donald Trump's first introduction to Russians who showed interest in New York real estate. Now, in terms of the Cold War and how the Cold War hasn't ended, I'm going to do an entire remote on Vladimir Putin so that people can understand his mind. It's a very unusual mindset. One of the things I try to do is not judge anyone that I remote. I simply receive their view of the world. And I can tell you, of all the people that I have done a remote viewing, I have never quite met anybody with a mind like Vladimir Putin's. He's you're just going to have to watch the remote. It's a world I know very little about, and when I remoted it, I was pretty gobsmacked. So basically, what started to happen with the Kremlin is that they started to buy up specifically and show an interest in not only Manhattan real estate, but as far as when Putin got involved with this project, they were extremely interested in the New York Stock Exchange and the American financial sector. And it's important for people who are watching this remote to understand what the agenda was of Russia. If they could get control over the financial sector in New York, if they could get control of that area and the people that work in that area, then theoretically they would have some control over the American Stock Exchange. This area of real estate that the Russians began to buy up became what I call Little Putin Island. It became a Putin Island where dirty Russian money, this is money that was acquired through excuse me, various different illegal activities, was used to buy up the financial sector and people in the financial sector that were of interest to Putin. Now, there's a couple of banks that you probably would want to know about. There's the Deutsche Bank, and then there's the Russian sanctioned bank, which is, not surprisingly, located in the New York financial district, called AEB Bank, and it was Barack Obama that began to sanction that bank. So what Putin did is that they had money, laundered money, that was from various different illegal crime activities, and he took that money and he put it into two accounts. There were two accounts. One was the AEB Bank and one was an account in Deutsche Bank. So this dirty money was then laundered. And what they did, which was really pretty ingenious, what they did was they then targeted people of interest, people that would be of interest to the Kremlin. You're getting the real story here, people. And they compromised them. They looked at people who they thought would be of interest to Russia, and they began to loan them large sums of money. One of those people happens to be Trump, but to be clear, based on the remotes that I have done, Trump was involved from very early on, and he was groomed very early on. Now, publicly, what they're saying on MSNBC was it goes back to 1987 when they began to notice that the Kremlin was trying to make him a Kremlin operative. But when I did a remote viewing on it, what I heard Donald Trump say when I was in the remote was that his energy was saying was that, oh, I was first introduced to Russians in the real estate industry through my father by accompanying my father on various different business dealings. So that tells me that the public story and the remote are different, that in fact he had been dealing with them much earlier than 1987. So the Russians were bringing spies over to the United States. They've been doing this for, excuse me, a long time. And these various different sleeper cells who publicly were renouncing the Kremlin, and they were basically embedded in the United States for 20, 30 years as sleeper cells. Some of those sleeper cells were given money, dirty Russian money, to buy up this Little Putin Island, this financial sector. It's pretty horrible, right? In New York. It's going to get worse, I'm sorry to say. Now, there was intercepting of so one of the things that they did is they began to compromise, by laundering money, they began to compromise Trump and the Trump organization by buying up Trump real estate, both in the United States and in the foreign countries where Trump was selling real estate. Ivanka Trump was heavily involved with that. I'll do a whole thing on her and on Kushner, and it's not pretty. So they have found that there is a Russian server that's communicating with a server in Trump Tower, and I did a remote on that. And what I found when I did a remote on that was that it appears from a remote viewer's perspective like little points of light. So you had the server out of Moscow, and it was sending little beeps, beep, 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 beep to this tower, to the Trump Tower, and then the Trump Tower was then sending beep, 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 the little lights. And then nobody in the public view knew much about what the heck was going on, which is why I wanted to know, as a remote viewer, what are we looking at here? And what I found was that these were financial, that it was money. So it was another way that Putin is washing the money. So he goes and he takes the money and then it gets changed. People won't be, you remove the source of where the money is coming from. Instead, it looks like the source is coming from the United States. It's coming from this Trump Tower. And then from there, the points of light went to several banks, and then those banks issued loans to people of interest. So from that remote, here is what I took away. Donald Trump is only one compromised person. There are actually hundreds of people that have received money through these types of accounts. So Putin, the Kremlin, they're very smart. This is the dark money, this is the dirty money that we see in the financial sector, where they're trying to have access to the finances in the United States. But they were also compromising various different people who basically they funded the political careers of various different people. Rohrabacher is under investigation for this. It is much deeper than that. I want to go even further into this and say that the dirty money went to these accounts, and then from there it was loans and money and dirty laundered money for various different financial dealings with people of interest who were politically and professionally of interest to the Kremlin. We're talking about hundreds of people. Now, Deutsche Bank got sanctioned. Evidently, their financial statements have been subpoenaed by Mueller, so they'll be able to open the books from all these banks and find out who took out loans. The server, though, transferring money to American banks, which is what I saw, and the people who received monies from those banks, that's a whole other thing that's going to blow over. In terms of what's going on in Washington, D.C., what's going to come out of this is also how many people were compromised and how much dark money there is. And so a lot of people are going to go under, not just Donald Trump. The other thing that I saw from the Mueller investigation, which has not come out, is that the public image or the public persona is that the investigation is on Donald Trump. The investigation was never on Donald Trump. The investigation was on people who had been compromised by the Kremlin, but more specifically, from what I've been able to see, compromised individuals inside the intelligence agencies. So in plainer words, the purpose of this investigation was to find people who were inside the intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, etc., who were working with the Kremlin. So what the American intelligence agencies did is that they began to intercept communications between people in the Pentagon. Flynn, he was involved. They intercepted phone calls, and Flynn was under investigation for this. And so what they did is they never charged Flynn because they wanted to continue to monitor Flynn. And so instead they simply removed him from his security and continued Obama requested that they continue to monitor the situation. I did a remote on the War Room, and that was what I heard Barack Obama say. He said, let's continue to monitor the situation. So they removed Flynn and they continued to monitor the situation. Now that put Barack Obama in a very difficult situation and his War Room in a very difficult situation, because they went to Obama. They said, basically, we have uncovered all this dark money and all these compromised people. Obama then sanctioned them. They had the Magnitsky Act. They sanctioned AEB Bank. And then, Obama being who he is, he did what Obama always does. Let's continue to monitor the situation. He's very pragmatic type of a guy. And the reason they chose to do that, because if they had acted immediately, if they had just swooped down and arrested Flynn and done that, it actually was not what the intelligence agencies wanted to do. What the intelligence agencies wanted to do is not alert anybody. And it was a risky thing for Obama and the intelligence agencies to choose to do, the generals to choose to do. But they did it because there were bigger fish to fry than even Donald Trump. There were bigger fish to fry than Donald Trump, because they had embedded themselves so deeply in our intelligence agencies that they were not going to be able to find those spies, those hidden people, and organize a spy swap and do everything that they needed to do if they had arrested Flynn at that point, if they had gone in and shut the whole thing down early on. And so they were looking at the bigger picture. Obama was looking at the bigger picture, and the intelligence agencies were looking at the bigger picture, and so they stood back and they did nothing by design. But they were actually doing something. What they were doing was that they and the NSA and the intelligence agencies and Homeland Security were monitoring these communications. And in the NSA, they were recording all of this communication so that they could locate where things were going on. For example, they know that the Russians had been able to hack into various different voter rolls. They monitored the situation because it was more important to them to be able to catch who was assisting them inside the Pentagon and Homeland Security to allow that hack to take place. That is a bigger fish to fry as far as intelligence agency is concerned than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is here and gone in 4 years or 2 years. And then they just did a soft coup. They brought in Kelly and other people to control the situation and monitor the situation to minimize the damage as best they could. There are certain things they couldn't prevent. There are certain things they could prevent. But that is the story of Flynn. That is the story of the intelligence agencies. And that is the story of Russia's relationship with the United States and compromising people of interest. That's why it was the financial sector. They wanted to get control of our financial sector. That's why the server was giving off beeps to a bank coming out of Trump Tower. It was financial. It was just another way to take laundered money and get it to people that they were trying to bribe. And that is why dark money in Washington, D.C. is such a big deal right now. So that's the whole story. There's a lot more I could say. I'm sorry I spoke so quickly, but it culminates in about a year of remote viewings, and I tried to do it in 16 minutes. I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to see if I can do one remote viewing to talk to you about Michael Cohen and what I found out about Michael Cohen. I have a remote viewing I want to do on Michael Cohen. I have a remote viewing I did on Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. My heart goes out to them because I see the emotion behind the tensions in their relationship. And even though I don't approve of what certain people are doing, as an empath, I am obligated to feel compassion. So I have compassion for Donald Trump too. I just, think he would have been suited more to being an entertainer and an actor than a president. I think he would have been a great actor. All right, thanks for watching, everybody, this remote on the Russian hacking remote. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can do something on Cohen now. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.